That is right, Italian tank destroyers are going to be the newest addition to World of Tanks Blitz as a tech tree line. And the weirdest part is that World of Tanks PC is also currently working on Italian tank destroyers. Now, what does this mean? I'm not really sure. World of Tanks Blitz and World of Tanks PC usually try to be quite different from each other on how they release tanks statistically. The Yo on PC is a single shot, kind of like an E5. The Yo in Blitz is an autoloader with a triple or double shotgun. So when it comes to the Italian tank destroyers, I'm not too sure if these tanks are going to be identical in their playstyles among PC and Blitz, but for now, all I can ride on is the information that World of Tanks PC has given us, and that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. The first tank in the line on PC is the Semovente M41. It's based off a Stug, and as you can see, it looks very similar to one. It's going to have pretty okay mobility, not much armor. I mean, it's down at tier 5, so you wouldn't expect much of it, apart from it to be like your average tier 5 tank destroyer. It carries a 75mm cannon just like the Stug, and yeah, it's just a small little dinky tank destroyer. In Tier 6, we move up to the Semovente M43 Bassato. This vehicle is basically an upgraded version of the Tier 5. It has slightly more armor, a bit worse mobility, but the main advantage is its 102mm cannon. It's going to feature massive accuracy and big amounts of penetration. Now, when it comes to the lower tiers on this line, I should add that there are no auto-loading features until we start to get into Tier 8. But this takes, to me, just seems like an ARL, which is the French Tier 6 TD, kind of turned into an Italian counterpart. They look similar, and with a 102mm, probably going to have similar characteristics of the Alpha and penetration as well. In Tier 7, we find the Semovente Contracarro Mod 1956, and this is where the line starts to get interesting and really starts to branch out in its own unique way. This tank features 10 degrees of gun depression and fantastic frontal armor. The Italian tank destroyers actually feature great armor. What's surprising to me is that Wargaming's actually planning on adding the Italian TDs before adding the Rinoceronte and the Italian heavy tanks into the game, but I guess we'll have to see if they add those in the future as well. But you'll notice this tank does not carry a fully traversable turret, 30 degrees to the right and 30 degrees to the left. This tank kind of reminds me of like a T-28 prototype, just with a tier 7 turret, and I don't know, it just looks really interesting, like a pretty solid vehicle, carries a very nice gun with fantastic penetration values, and this would be a very hard tank to counter on the battlefield. And from the pictures Wargaming's shown us, this tank will be in the line. Making our way up to the Tier 8, we find the Contracarro Mod 67. This vehicle to me looks basically like a T110E4, but down at Tier 8. It does carry very strong frontal protection, as will all of the higher tier Italian tank destroyers. But this tank is the beginning of the auto-loading guns. And that's right, not auto-reloading. While the Rinoceronte and the Progetto 65 carry both auto-reloaders on PC, and the Progetto and Blitz has an auto-reloader, when it comes to this tank, it's going to carry a auto-loading single-shot type gun. And the way it works is that basically you got a big drum, maybe 5 shells, maybe 4 shells, depending on what Blitz is. And the way it works is you're going to have like a 6 or 5 second interclip between each of the shots. This tank is going to carry a 120mm. So you'll deal 400 damage, but it's going to be like 5-6 seconds between each shell to deal that 400 damage, but your clip reload is only going to be maybe 15 seconds. So basically, you have a very long burst time, but it gives you big effective amounts of damage and basically a steady rate of fire. And then at the end, you have to reload the whole clip to then get a kind of better DPM than a single shot, but at the return, you have to have a reload at the end of it that's longer. Kind of weird, but I think that it's a good concept because you never really know when the person's reloading their gun if they back up, and by the time you do, they might already have their shells back due to the very fast reload. At tier 9, we find the Contracarro 1 Mark II. This vehicle, to me, looks like the exact hull from a Kampfpanzer 70. You can see the back of it, that grille right there, is almost identical to the KPZ. So, to me, it looks like it's going to have a Kampfpanzer hull with some incredibly well-armored turret. We can see that turret looks very well-armored from its super rounded design, and I bet it's going to shrug off a lot of shells, maybe kind of like a turreted E3, but obviously this tank is again going to carry an auto-loading gun. Now when it comes to the higher the tier you go, the alpha is going to increase in the line. And finally, we make our way up in tier 10 to the Contracarro 3 Minotauro. I think that this vehicle looks really cool. Frontally, it's got definitely some American aspects in it. You can see the lower plate looks identical to what is a Yo, but at the same time, if you ever take a look at the Rinoceronte, the overall frontal design is actually pretty similar to what we're looking at here, and especially when we take a look at the back of this tank, it's basically using a Rinoceronte hull. When it comes to the turret, it looks incredibly thick. As I said, for the tier 9, reminds me of a T110E3, just mounted with a turret. So I think that the turret armor on these tanks are going to be insane. The hull armor will definitely be the weak spot, specifically that big ol' lower plate. But this tank's going to carry 10 degrees of gun depression, which means that it'll be pretty hard to showcase that lower plate. The real interesting part is when we take a look at the 130mm armament. This vehicle is going to carry 5 shells, dealing 530 damage each. Now when it comes to Blitz, that would most likely be 460 alpha. It comes with a massive 8-second interclip between each shell. Now what this means is that if you are using this tank as a single shot, you're not going to have as much DPM as a vehicle like a Badger or some of the highest DPM tank destroyers, but you're also going to have a fully traversable turret with 10 degrees of gun depression, great mobility, and that's an advantage over the Badger. So what you're basically doing is you're going to have really good DPM for a burst of 5 shells. It's going to take you 32 seconds to deal all of the damage, and then you've got a 24-second downtime where hopefully you're not in line of sight of the enemy and they don't know you're reloading, and then you just pop back out. And the great thing about this tank is that for 8 seconds, people aren't going to know if you're reloading a shell or you're just reloading your clip. And that means you're going to have only 16 seconds left after that to reload the final shells in the vehicle. I think that the mechanic behind this tank is really cool, and that if it's done right, it'll make for an incredibly powerful tank destroyer, especially because these tanks are going to feature incredible armor, great mobility, fantastic gun depression. It's kind of like a heavy tank destroyer line, which I think sounds great. Maybe an E4, but imagine an E4 with an auto-loading gun. So let me know what you guys think about this tank destroyer line in the comments down below. Now, as I said earlier, I'm talking about this line from PC statistics. So I'm not exactly sure how this line is going to reenact in World of Tanks Blitz, as PC and Blitz usually differ from their lines. What I can say is that if Wargaming decides to give a vehicle like this an 8-second interclip in Blitz, I don't know how good it'll be, because 460 alpha for 8 seconds, it's definitely fast, but it will also give a lot of tanks the opportunity just to ignore your reload altogether and just absolutely smoke you within the interclip reload itself. But I guess we'll have to find out. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. If you'd obviously like to see more content like this in the future, please consider smashing that subscribe button down below. Helps out the channel a crazy amount. And let me know your thoughts, feelings, and opinions about the Italian auto-reloading tank destroyer. Not auto-reloading. I always try to say auto-reloading with Italian, but just Italian auto-loading tank destroyers in the game. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.